And we are live-ish. We're recording anyway. Welcome back to Worldhoppers, the collaborative YouTube channel where we talk about all things all the time with all the people, and all of the AdSense revenue and merch sales revenue goes to charity. So watch and shop. It's a good thing. Today we're going to talk about Ken Liu, and I don't know how this is going to go because we're all fans of Ken Liu, and that's why we're all here. But we have not necessarily read the same things. So we will be just vaguely enthusiastic for the next however long. So if you are watching and have not read everything by Ken Liu, neither have the people on this panel. So spoilers are not super likely. So hang out. I'm not. Who's new to Worldhoppers? Have you been on Worldhoppers before, Kyle?
No.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm Kyle. I run the YouTube channel Read by Kyle. Mostly fantasy based, some horror and sci-fi and some other genres. I also have read everything that Ken Liu has published, so I will be able to participate in all of these non-spoiler discussions. But yeah,
You're going to be the one to spoil all of us.
Yeah, that's my plan today.
All right.
Wait, you've actually read the short story you haven't read yet?
Oh my god, I knew you would call me out for this. No, okay, there's one short story I haven't read, but I've read everything else.
You had the whole week. You said you were going to read it at the beginning of the week so that you could say you read everything.
You're right, but then I didn't, so I was going to.
Word is bond, Kyle.
It's such a good one too.
I believe you. Yeah.
Which story is it?
It's you haven't read The Hidden Girl. It's Byzantine Empire.
Empathy.
I was really hoping it'd be something that I had read, so I could be like.
I'm actually pretty sure you will be underwhelmed by The Hidden Girl, but I'm accepting that.
Me?
I saw the Hidden Girl is on Kindle Unlimited right now, at least here in the UK. If anyone has Kindle Unlimited, then.
I don't, but I'm always informed about what's on Kindle Unlimited because people are always like, guess what's on Kindle Unlimited? And I'm like, cool. If we'd like to go around maybe and say what we have read and how we came to be aware of Ken Liu and what all we've read from him, our relationship with Ken Liu, if we want to go in a circle. Edie, go first is what I'm saying.
Okay. So I think I'm going to answer for Angela and Abby and say that Paper Menagerie was the first story collection. Sorry if you hear my dog barking. He's going nuts. But yeah, so I buddy read this with Abby and Angela earlier this year. And we obviously all loved it. So yeah. And then I've read The Hidden Girl as well because, as I told Angela and Abby, I cannot wait for them. So
yeah, you're like, I'm going on ahead and reading more of this.
Yeah, but you guys made up for it by reading The Grace of Kings, so it's fine. And I haven't read that yet, so.
They've read more pages of Ken Liu than you have.
It's true. It is true.
How about you, Kyle? You've already told us you've read everything, but where did you start then? Tell us that.
So I read The Grace of Kings in 2016 when it first came out, and I initially really struggled with it. Hipster, yeah, for sure. I initially really struggled with it, and then I thought about DNFing it really early, but I was like, no, I'm going to power through this. And then it became one of my favorite books, but I didn't want to tarnish that experience, so I just never read further. And then I read The Paper Menagerie last year, and I was like, okay, this guy's one of my favorite authors. I should continue this series. And then now I just have completed everything except that short story that they want to razz me about.
Yeah. By the way, just to make sure, not a lot of people seem to know about it. Ken Liu has a story collection in the Star Wars universe, but we can talk about that later, I guess. But
also, I know you're a hipster and you're already ahead of the curve, but Grace Kings came out in 2015. So
I know. I wasn't that hipster. I was medium hipster.
I mean, actually, Kyle read it before it was written.
Gave the idea to Ken Liu. So I first read The Paper Menagerie in 2020. So I hadn't read the collection. I read the short story. My friend was at the time on her channel running a SFF short story series every week, and that story came up. Same with the Codex Cantina, which does a lot of literary fiction short story deep dives on YouTube. And so I read it for that and cried because it really hits, especially if you're first generation immigrant in America. It's just a lot. And then I was reading Sunspot Jungle Volume 2, which is a huge anthology, and it had what's the one that starts with S? Simulacrum? I can't say the name, but it's in the Paper Menagerie.
Simulacrum?
Yeah, that one. It's in the Paper Menagerie. And that one also really hit close to home for me. And so at that point, I was 2 for 2 on like really standout short stories. And I'm like, I need to read more. So I bought all the collections, but it wasn't till Evie badgered me that I finally read The Paper Menagerie. And then last month I read The Hidden Girl. And this month I'm reading, I think 70% of the way through Grace of Kings, and I'm liking it. So it's definitely a short story author writing a fantasy novel though. And it's really interesting with like that, the way he is chunking things. I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing. But it's been really good.
Yeah, so I have read with Evie and Angela, The Paper Menagerie, and really, really liked it. I think it was my first 5-star of the year. And really, really liked a lot of the stories in this. And that was basically because I think I got it for Christmas, and then Evie and Angela were going to read it. And I was like, I want to too. Let me buddy read it with you. Like, please let me join your cool club. And then
the cool Voxer club we have.
Yeah. And then in March, I read The Grace of Kings. And I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as Paper Menagerie. I gave it like a 3.5 stars. I saw a lot of potential with it, but it wasn't like my favorite book ever. And then this month, I have read The Wall of Storms, and I'm completely in love, obsessed, best book of the year type, absolutely amazing. Will very much gush about The Wall of Storms because I loved this.
Yes, The Wall of Storms is the best. It's absolutely incredible. You guys should read it.
I unreasonably thought that I could like binge it yesterday before this, but that did not happen.
I mean, you could binge an 850-page book.
It wasn't just that. I was planning to read Wall of Storms and 2 other books yesterday, and I did the other 2, but I did.
I thought you were going to say, I thought I could read Wall of Storms and The Veiled Throne and Speaking Bones or something.
Even if you can read 100 pages an hour, which, you know, some people can, that is so many hours of reading.
Yeah, well, it was a stretch goal.
So did you start it?
No. I didn't even finish the other 2. Like I finished one and I almost finished the other one, and I did not even start Wall of Storms.
Okay, it's not like you even got like a third of the way through and were like, I'm not going to make it to the end. It was I thought I was going to read this yesterday, I just didn't do anything.
Correct. I mean, it's not that I didn't do anything. I was very busy. I didn't get to that.
Your priorities were not with Ken Liu.
I mean, honestly, yeah, because like there's stuff that I need to film today that I did need to read those other things for. And I was like, I mean, I'm kind of filming something for Wall of Storms, but like I don't have to read Wall of Storms tomorrow.
But also, I feel as though, I mean, maybe I read it over like the course of a week, but I don't know if I'd have liked it if I'd just binged it.
Well, I feel like binging it is almost necessary, well, based on Grace of Kings, just because there's so many names and so much information that I feel like if enough time passes, I will lose the plot and I will lose the names and be like, I forgot.
Isn't really the same in that way though. Like you spend a lot of time with several characters that like you're not going to forget. Like
also, like I've been reading Grace of Kings for 2 weeks, and I feel like I'm actually more in it because every day I have to be with these people again. Like I don't know, but
that's how memory works.
I guess.
Literature Science Alliance.
Like there was parts of this that I binged. Like there was days where I read 150 pages in a day, which for me is like a binge.
I agree. For me too.
But I don't know if I could have read it all over the course of a day.
That's like reading like Stormlight Archive book in one day. Like I could never do that.
Or it's nothing like that because it's good.
Well, I just meant in terms of pages and amount of people, and like the scope they're both epic and big.
I feel like I appreciated it more, having more time with it and letting it ruminate in my brain.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually kind of hoped to read it before this because I agree, you know, reading it over a course of time can help with that, but also talking about something after you've read it helps it stick in your brain. So like that's why buddy reading is often great. Not even that you need support or anything. It's just that like you're able to speak your thoughts as they come to you. So it like cements them in your brain. So that's like actually more why I wanted to read it before this chat, because I was hoping that it'll like help it stick in my brain. But anyway, I started with Paper Menagerie because Hillary from Bookborn chose it for my TV when we like did a TBR swap, and did not warn me that it would hurt me. I was not expecting to cry at all, let alone like 3 times. So I just, if anyone is thinking of picking it up, you now are warned that it is not a light read. And the others, it's not like the other stories are happy. There's just some that like make you cry, and the other ones are just depressing downers. They're
There are
just
a few that aren't, like at the
one happy
beginning. There's
one.
like one or two
There's
that are
one
just
happy one.
more thoughts.
they're like, it's like reading that, and then I read that whole book in one day, which is also not, I don't advise that. It's quite an emotional roller coaster. Like I just like finished it and I was just gonna stare at a wall for like an hour.
Wait,
Like,
you read this in one day?
yeah.
We read that over the course of like 2.5 weeks, I think, in our buddy read. I think.
Yeah, we did like one story a day.
About-ish. And sometimes there was a longer one and we would take 2 days for that unofficially. Like we were pretty chill.
It's kind of like when people batch get vaccines and get them all in one day. That's kind of what reading.
Why would you want to do that though? Like, I definitely have had like 3 vaccines in one day, and you come out and your arms are just like they don't work.
That's how my soul and heart were after reading Paper Menagerie all in one day. Just bloated with feelings.
What's everyone's favorite Paper Menagerie story? Since I think we have all read the Paper Menagerie.
So this is actually a Paper Menagerie Gush Fest, but in which you are allowed to mention that you've read the Dandelion Dynasty.
What do you mean? I hate that question.
Mine is Good Hunting,
I know that
like hands down.
That's definitely not my favorite, or
No,
even
it's not
among
my
my favorites.
where no Paper Menagerie.
I would
Most Angela. How about that? It doesn't have to be your favorite. Which one do you want to mention?
Well, I don't know. I'll think about
All
it.
of them.
Abby, go.
But I'm sorry, I'm just looking through the list.
I'll go. The 2 that made me cry, therefore they're the best, because that's how feelings work. Were dang it, I just looked at the names. The what's it called? The Literomancer?
That one's
The
very good. Yeah.
Literomancer and
Oh,
Paper Menagerie.
The Literomancer.
Literomancer like already wrecked me, and then I was like, okay, so that's the sad one. And then I got to Paper Menagerie, and I was like, this is worse. Why is this worse?
So I think one I want to mention that maybe it's not technically my favorite because like 2 of them I have read twice and I actually do like them the most, but I already mentioned them, which was, Simulacrum, whatever. I don't know how to say that, and the Paper Menagerie. But I really like The Man Who Ended History, a documentary, because I knew while I was reading it, I was like, oh, this reminds me of a Ted Chiang short story. And it was inspired by that Ted Chiang short story that I really like. And I don't know, I still like think about it. And it, I thought he did a really good job at introducing a lot of moments in 20th century history in Asia that like I was aware of, but not super aware of. And so I was not only learning, but I was emotionally invested. And I really liked the thought experiment of what does define history and what makes something a fact or I don't know. I thought the thought experiment in that story and the emotions, I thought it was a really well balanced sci-fi story.
Well, in general, I think that's something you could say for the Paper Menagerie collection is that the number of thought experiments that are on offer and the varieties of writing style and the varieties of story style and type, the like really only unifying factor for these stories is that they are good and that they are all playing with an idea in an interesting way. So they all kind of, not only like are they emotionally taxing, but they are mentally taxing because they ask you to consider things that are either strange or uncomfortable or something that you never would have considered before and like are stretching like parts of you that you didn't actually like think that you'd have to think about ever.
A thing I love about Ken Liu, and it even exists in The Grace of Kings, is that you can tell first and foremost he's a sci-fi author. So Grace of Kings is an epic fantasy secondary world. It has a lot of the trappings of political fantasy. But when he describes the technology in his world, I just like geek out so much because it's kind of got pseudo steampunk vibes and like the way
I think he calls it silk punk.
Maybe, yeah, I think actually that's the name for it. But like, I just love when he just like info dumps a couple sentences of why this thing works the way it does. And The Hidden Girl, I don't think I like more than the Paper Menagerie, but I think I have more fun with it because A, it doesn't hurt you as much. And B, it's more his sci-fi short story collection. And I just like...
So I'll agree and disagree with you about the info dumps about technology because like as a personal, like having fun kind of a question, like I don't especially love that, but I do love seeing it because when I read his version of it, it actually like you can see that this like thought went into this and this makes sense. And this like what you're telling me, like I buy it as being a thing. Like, do I love getting all this detail about something that I probably don't actually need? Like, maybe not, but like I've read too many fantasy books where they like they write a page about this thing that they invented for their world, and all I'm thinking about is like, not only are you wasting my time, this doesn't make any sense. This is stupid, and you haven't thought through how this affects your world, whereas he has. So when I read it, I'm just like, I can relax and feel comfortable with how you're telling me this thing, and I don't have to be like, this doesn't make sense. I can just be like, that's great. That's brilliant. Well done.
There was quite a lot of that in the Wall of Storms. Like
There's a lot more Wall of Storms.
There's a lot. Like,
Also,
I was just thinking when you were describing that, I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot in Wall of Storms where he's like explaining the whys and hows of how they've managed to achieve something with the different technology that they've managed to create out of different things as they puzzle things together.
Like, I never knew how a kite worked in the real world because I never flew kites as a kid. I now know how a kite works because I've read Grace of Kings. Like,
also,
that should...
also, Ken makes his own inventions. For like, if he's writing something into the Dandelion Dynasty, he'll go and make like a version of it to make sure that the theory actually works because he is like an engineer. So,
wait,
and like,
so he has one of those kites?
I don't know the specifics. I've just heard him say that. And then also, like, for the people who have started Dandelion Dynasty, the logograms they talk about, which are like they have in the Dandelion Dynasty, they have like big letters, like you can carve letters to make more special characters, and he's actually made those in real life so that he can like see how they look and stuff. So he really puts a lot of care and attention into that aspect of it.
Yeah, his love of language comes through in so many stories, like his sci-fi, his fantasy, his historical.
The Literomancer.
Yeah, well, that's the stronger one. But like, even when he's just like writing like a sci-fi people in AI space story, the way language changes and evolves with like emoticons and stuff, like he really thinks about how would we communicate differently in this different setting. And he's
also
very thoughtful.
Like the bookmaking habits of blah 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 is like that as well, and reminds me like when the very first thing I ever read of Ken Liu, obviously it's a paper menagerie, but the first story. So like my absolute very first taste of Ken Liu was the bookmaking habits of blah, whatever it's called.
Select Species.
Select Species.
You were almost there.
The important thing is that it's bookmaking habits, and like it. Immediately put me in a good frame of mind and good disposition towards Ken Liu because it reminded me of reading an ethnography in college, which like I like that. This is not like, oh, this is like college reading. Like I liked reading ethnographies, and it genuinely felt like one. I was like, I could buy this being an ethnography of alien species as concerns their bookmaking habits comparatively, and I was like, I like you, sir. Let's see what else. And then he made me cry like 10 times, and I was like, Jesus, okay. I thought this was going to be like a fun intellectual read. Oh, ethnographies. And then I'm weeping. So I was not prepared. But
my wife still won't read Paper Menagerie because I was reading it next to her when I got to the Paper Menagerie short story. And so she's like, reading another book, and she looks over at me and I'm fine. Like 5 minutes later, I'm just like blubbering. She's like, what happened to you? I'm like, it's just so sad. And now she won't read it. She's like, I don't want to feel that.
It's also not to like no spoilers, but like reading that short story collection really puts into sharp relief how much human beings really can't process large scale like magnitudinal tragedy, that we can really only process the individual and the personal. Because like there's stories in the Paper Menagerie that are depressing because there's like a lot of death and a lot of terrible things happening. And like that is sad, but it's a much simpler and arguably much less tragic. Like the stakes are quite low in the story Paper Menagerie. And I was, as you say, blubbering because it's this deeply personal story. And like, if we're talking about like, like objectively, which is worse, which is a worse situation, which should make you more upset. It's not, Paper Menagerie is like among the least actually like tragic. There's not actually anything that bad going on in that story. It's just so upsetting as a human to human, wherein like it's just it makes you, not anyone's story, but like having read that story, it makes you kind of think about like what is it that actually engages your feelings, because like it's the same as like watching the news and you get desensitized to like war zone after war zone, and you're like, I should feel things about this. But you show me a puppy in a kennel and Sarah McLachlan singing about it, and I am weeping. So like,
and he even talks about this in a short story in The Hidden Girl. And it's the one that Kyle hasn't read.
Oh.
This is the exact theme that he tackles in that short story.
So I will say that to kind of shift gears a little bit, but maybe kind of bridge a gap. for people that haven't read The Hidden Girl but have read The Paper Menagerie, don't expect the same thing in The Hidden Girl. And I think definitely read Ken Liu's preface. That totally set my expectations of The Hidden Girl. Because it feels like, I think I'm paraphrasing here. He's like, this was like collated as a best of type thing. Whereas The Hidden Girl is like, you can tell it's very personal to him. And it's like much more contained in its thematic elements. And like Angela said, it's like, it's very sci-fi. It's not like, oh, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of like alternate history, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's sci-fi. So
And it's kind of a really cool mixtape. Like that one, people aren't going to love it as much because it doesn't have, I think, the same emotional impact. And people do read for emotional impact. I'm one of those people. But like,
if you cried, it's brilliant. Those are the rules.
Sure. Yeah, I don't actually disagree with that rating scale.
Yeah, well, it means it's affected you. It means it's really hit you in the feels, so it must be good.
Except for there are definitely books that I've read where I'm like, I know you're manipulating me right now, and I see what you're doing, and it's dirty that you're doing this, and I am crying. It is working. But no, that's
Spite.
When I think he taps into something similar that authors like Robin Hobb do, where just looks at small injustices that anyone can experience on any given day. Like, he frequently has children that are bullied by those around them, not like aggressive bullying. It's usually very subtle social bullying. But man, those moments, like, I wasn't even heavily bullied as a kid, but I hate viewing that injustice on the page and then seeing what that initial injustice that shouldn't have happened and how that progresses to that character's arc. Like, that happens in two. It's been both of Leanna's favorite stories, is that trope.
Yeah. It's not just bullying, though, or it's not just injustice when it comes to bullying. When it's like children specifically, it's also helplessness. Because like as an adult, like it's not that it's it's fine if you're bullied as an adult. It's definitely not. But you have greater agency in your life and greater control over things, and you're taken, I guess, arguably a little more seriously, at least by people in your life. Whereas kids, like, you already are so powerless in your life on the best of days, and then when you're bullied, you are truly, truly powerless.
So I think he's really good at doing that, and I think that's why, even though I agree that what people say Grace of Kings is a little more arm's length than a lot of his works, I do feel like I still get emotionally invested in small moments because he's still really good that when he wants to, when he writes just like a paragraph of something that he's like, I want you to actually care about this moment, he brings me in that short amount of time somehow. Like, it's not as character driven as other fantasy I've read. But
I think the writing style is most similar in anything in Paper Menagerie to Good Hunting. So Evie, you're going to love it.
Yeah.
But I am much more connected. I got so much more connected in the second book.
The second book.
Which is why
really
I think cool. Leanna's going to give it a 3.5 star. That is why you and Leanna are flipped on these things. That's how I feel. Because Leanna gave Grace of Kings 5 stars.
Maybe.
Sometimes we agree.
We do. There's.
I can't think of anything. But
I was about to say, what do you guys actually agree on? Winter Night?
Winter Night, Strange the Dreamer.
Have you read Radiance yet?
Yeah, I liked Radiance.
I'm just thinking of epic fantasy that you guys agree on, and I actually don't. Abby agrees more with me than Leanna, which is not a good sign. I mean, it's a great sign for me, but.
I will say,
there is, this just has a lot of elements that I see in this. Like, I don't think I was crying, but there were scenes where I had to stop reading in this.
Also, Grace of
Kings, it was affecting me. Grace
of Kings, and I thought this would happen. It reminds me most of the short story in Paper Menagerie. What's it called? Oh, I'm trying to find it. All the Flavors, which I was kind of expecting, and that's the one it reminds me of. And that's what I like. I went into Grace of Kings being like, I bet it's going to be similar to All the Flavors, and that's kind of what I've been getting.
So All the Flavors is one of my favorite short stories by him, but that's because I nerd out because I really like the story of the three brothers in the Three Kingdoms, and then so it's about like Guan Yu and stuff. And the Grace of Kings, like I wanted to mention this earlier when you were mentioning that it feels a lot like short stories. It's because it's really inspired by like Wuxia and like ancient Chinese text. And so there's the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is like a big text that I have over there somewhere. And it's like 2,400 pages of like pseudo-historical text where that very thing happens, where it's like it'll just follow a character for 3 pages and then they'll just dip for like 50 pages and then they'll come back and you're like, oh, remember this person? And so when you're used to that style, I find it's a lot easier. Like that is what got me through Grace of Kings the first time, is that I'd already been used to it. And I find a lot of people struggle with that when they've never experienced it before, because they're like, where is the overall point going? And so what I would say to that is like, let the story take you where it's going. It does coalesce. And then especially after Grace of Kings, you get way more intimate moments. Like most people, when they don't love the Grace of Kings, it's due to that distance narrative. And because I already had exposure to that, I actually found it very emotionally moving. Like I was for the climax of the Grace of Kings, I was really involved, but I know a lot of people don't feel that way. But I do think that the Wall of Storms gets more like to the traditional fantasy that we're used to in terms of how close it is to the characters.
Well, Grace of Kings weirdly most reminded me of, in not in the storyline, but like in what you just described, the narrative structure, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, where a lot of people struggle with American Gods for that exact reason, that it's kind of all over the place. And it kind of is like a short story collection, as well as a road trip book, as well as like a fantasy epic, as well as lit fic. Like it's kind of doing that and meandering a lot and pausing to tell you about a character that is like, okay, we're done with that now, and now we're going to go back to the road trip. And then, oh, look, remember that character from that short story I told? Well, they're actually in it, and here they are. And you're like, okay, I think I know what we're doing. So yeah, Grace of Kings, the writing itself is like nothing like American Gods, but that same kind of like slowly building a mosaic that you kind of have to like let it build.
Yeah.
And I guess it's very historical. Like there's very limited fantasy elements in the Grace of Kings. Like, there's some, but like it's very historical. Whereas Wall of Storms does become much more fantasy, I'd say.
Yeah. And I like Grace of Kings because I guess I felt like its symbolism was very easy to figure out. Like I knew instantly like what flower meant what person, and like each part, like has a name because it's split into 4 or 5 parts, can't remember. And like after a chapter or two, you're like, oh, I know why this part's named this, so I know what I'm getting in this arc, and let's see what's going to happen. It's very different, but I don't know. It's taking me a long time to read, but I don't mind it. Like it's like I'm cozy with it. I'm just like, okay. And I don't normally really like political strategy, global politics books that much. That's not normally my intrigue. Yeah, no, but like that's the intrigue of the book, and I am enjoying it. It's just that's like why Ken Liu's awesome. Like this is basically Grace of Kings is my anti-buzzword book, but I picked it up because I trust Ken Liu, and it's great. Like that's what I'm saying. Like there's always your anti-buzzword book that works for you.
Angela's forgiving the politics because it's great, and I'm forgiving all of the like tech mumbo jumbo because it's great. And so like together we're like, this is great because the stuff we love is great, and the stuff that we put up with is still great. Like he manages to bring us all along.
One thing I like about the tech stuff so much is that I don't understand how it's relevant until it is. Like the Vegas information about Wall of Storms. There's a part where people have to think about cow stomachs, and I'm like, why are we spending pages on how cow stomachs work?
It's really not a spoiler.
Yeah, and then it comes relevant. And so when you find out why it's relevant, I was like, whoa, he made the cow stomachs relevant. And that kind of stuff makes me.
That's the blurb for the cover. He made cow stomachs relevant.
I'm about to say that, Evie, I'm spoiler sensitive to all heaven, and that is not a spoiler. I don't even know how that fits in.
I don't even want expectations set. Like, I'm already.
I chose that because there's no possible way you can get a spoiler from that. I chose that with specificity that you can't get spoiled.
So it doesn't involve cow stomachs?
Well, yes, but you don't know what that means.
But that's just such a strict thing. It's like you don't want to know the actor in the movie. Like, what is happening?
I'm guessing that, Grace of Kings has kings and Wall of Storms has either a wall or a storm or both.
The Veiled Throne probably has a throne.
Maybe a veil.
Does Speaking Bones have bones that speak?
Hopefully. Otherwise, 1 star. There were no speaking bones.
Speaking of speaking bones, Angela was talking about how he can make a paragraph really affecting. And speaking bones, this is not a spoiler, Evie. A character dies. Yes, occasionally a character dies. And it's not an important character. But in 1 paragraph or maybe 2 paragraphs, he makes it like really affecting. And I was just like, wow. Like I had to message Hillary, like Bookborn, and I was like, were you upset about this too?" And she was like, "Yeah, I was. It was really emotionally affecting." I'm like, "Okay, great. It's not just me." So he can really invoke emotion very quickly when he wants to.
I mean, that's what's evident in Paper Menagerie, because like short stories don't have a lot of time to get your buy-in and don't have a lot of time to like set the scene and get you like pulled into like the setting or the emotions or connected to the characters. And that's why it's don't read it all in one day. Don't do what I did, because like he sucks you into all of them and you care about all of them, and the whiplash and the emotional turmoil that you'll feel because you've just given your whole heart to a story and now you're expected to do it again over and over and over, and you can't read it and not care. It's impossible. You're a monster if you don't care.
And sometimes you can just be going along, you're perfectly fine, you're going along, and then suddenly you'll get to a page and you'll be like
the Neuromancer is so unassuming at the beginning, and by the end you're just like, but why, Ken? But why?
Well, I mean, all this talk about like how he's emotionally evocative, valid, true, 1,000% correct. I think also with Ken Liu's
I sense a butt coming.
Yeah. Well, I think in addition to that, like just the way that he structures at the very least stories, and I imagine it's the same way with the Grace of Kings, like he's very intentional with his writing, and the stories that he's telling, while there are the emotional moments, or they might be the entirety of that story, like he just reminds me of Ted Chiang. Like Ted Chiang is more like fully thought experiment, I think. And he just kind of bridges that gap of like narrative storytelling with like just really thought-provoking, I don't know, narratives, I guess. So
yeah, they're definitely different. Like, but they, like, I would, they're definitely, if you like this, you have to try that just to see, because I think there's a lot of overlap in what people, if you are craving what Ken Liu gives you in short stories, if you're like, yes, this is the type of short story I like to read. I'm not even a short story reader, but I really enjoyed this. Then you have to try Ted Chiang, because Ted Chiang only writes short story. That is his skill. That is his bread and butter. He crafts stories painstakingly for years to try and get it right. And that's something I also like about Ken Liu. I don't know if it'll hold up, but like I've always felt like no matter how long or short a story was by him, it was the appropriate page length. Like pretty much, like obviously this is not 100% accuracy, but a lot of authors don't know when to stop and don't know when to keep going. Like they don't know how much more space there is in their story. And I feel like he really has a sense of, in his story, he wants to tell how to do all of that. Like there was like a 4-page story in The Hidden Girl that I'm like, wow, I don't want more than that. That was very like effective. That was really well done. And like not many authors can do that.
To further that point, Grace of Kings does not feel bloated. It feels like it's dense, but it doesn't feel like, oh, there's just a bunch of filler in Grace of Kings. It's always
I'm just more worried about like the third book. Like I'm not quite sure the third and fourth book will need to be 1,000 pages each. We'll see.
Oh, ye of little faith.
Well,
Kyle?
I would agree. There could have been some editing decisions made. But I actually think, so the second half of The Veiled Throne is the controversial half for spoiler reasons. Some people really love it, and then some people don't like it, but I find most people that don't like it, it's just because they're really not expecting it. But I actually think that Angela and Evie will really like it.
Oh no, Kyle. Oh, that's fine.
You froze, Kyle.
You froze, but you said I was going to like it, so that's fine.
Okay. Leanna, I don't think is going to like it. I don't know about Abby, and I think Evie and Angela are going to like it.
Well, typically Abby and I like similar things in fantasy. Like, so we were actually talking like the first part of Grace of Kings. It's not the same as She Who Became the Sun, but I was reminded of moments in She Who Became the Sun, because like Grace of Kings, Shelley Parker Chan was pulling from historical Chinese storytelling when they were crafting the beginning of She Who Became the Sun.
And
so they were like
historical retellings too.
Well, and like they both had like a mythological, like they both reference a character who has to go to a place and like prove that they were worthy of being trained. Like there were like those parallels in mythological storytelling, and just both of them are kind of distanced at time, and both of them were about dudes on a map, moving the dudes on the map, and then there's backstabby political stuff in the background, you know, that whole.
I read around the same time last month Grace of Kings and Empress of Salt and Fortune, and they kind of a little bit mix them up. Because there's so many like little vignette type things in Grace of Kings that in my mind Empress of Salt and Fortune was sometimes a vignette in Grace of Kings.
I mean, it makes sense because that's also East Asian, you know, historical fantasy.
I really like how he interweaves history and like real world things, like both into the short stories, and I feel as though parts of Grace of Kings as well, where you can tell he's really pulled from rather traumatic parts of our history, and probably parts of history that I don't know that much about. And when I'm reading them, I'm like, but this actually happened.
Like in Paper Menagerie, the Monkey King.
Yep.
Is that what it's called? The story?
The Litigation Master and the Monkey King.
That one. I was like, damn.
Well,
I was like, thank God there was a Monkey King in this for some levity.
Like the amount of stuff that I was exposed to and learned because of the Paper Menagerie. Like I went to a World War II museum when I was in New Orleans, and I was just telling Ryan, "Oh, I learned about this thing in the Pacific, this," and like like it was just mentioning all these stories I'd read by Ken. He's like, "Man," because I think Ryan should read it because he was the one who showed me Ted Chiang. So I
basically, for the people out there who are like, "Oh, you're just a kid, grow up, you're reading fantasy. Why don't you read some like edifying books?" You're like, "Well, read Paper Menagerie and you'll learn stuff."
People on their high horse about genre fiction drives me crazy.
Have any of you guys read any of his translated works? Like
his most famous translated work is by an author I don't want to read right now, so that's a bummer for me.
No, I have The Three Body Problem, but I haven't read it.
I thought The Three Body Problem was really dry, but I just think the author is dry. I don't think that Ken is dry. Like, you can only do so much. So,
well, and also like
you're
kind of know how he
with him now.
I didn't hear any of that.
Sorry,
I like how you're on first name basis with him.
Well, I am talking to him tomorrow.
Ken's not dry. Ken.
Wait, are you really talking to him tomorrow?
Yeah, Hillary and I are doing a spoiler discussion for the whole Dandelion Dynasty.
That's exciting. I'm very excited for you.
Shameless plug for their already discussion about what is it, Grace of Kings, and you guys kind of talked about the Paper Menagerie.
Yeah, we mostly kept it spoiler free. It was just like general Dandelion Dynasty and the short stories.
So part 1 and then part 2 is tomorrow.
Spoilers.
As of date of filming this.
Oh, another thing I like about the Dandelion Dynasty, because I get burnt out these days on rebellion, resistance type fantasy stories, which I know is like the bread and butter of fantasy. And I've been reading it for years, but I'm getting burnt out on it because it's 2022 and I'm jaded as hell. But I actually really like
First Law.
I've read First Law, Leanna.
I was waiting for Joe Amber reference.
As soon as someone says they're jaded, I'm like, that's what you got to read First Law.
No, I think I just don't want to read it normally. But with the Dandelion Dynasty, characters actually ask the questions I'm always asking, which doesn't always happen in rebellion and resistance stories. And like, I trust how Ken Liu thinks, and I think that's part of it.
What are the questions that you're asking that no one's
asking? Just like, I feel like a lot of times, so in Dandelion Dynasty, there are 2-ish main perspectives. And I feel like they are very obvious characters to have, but you don't actually read them that often. And like so Cooney in the story asks questions of, why did we do all of this? What's affecting the average person? And most of the time, if you are in the upper echelons of a rebellion story, you are with, the generals or whatever, very few people are actually actively being like, what's happening to the little guy? Is changing back to this type of government actually more beneficial than staying with this type of government? And that is an active question that keeps being answered and recycled in the story in a way that I find engaging and not boring and not like.
So you do like the political stuff?
Yeah, I use
the same with the Wall of Storms. There's a lot of like the politics is thinking about the masses and not
because like sometimes I just feel like you get so like I mean, so I like Mistborn. But I do think Mistborn falls into this problem of we're just so with the people who are in control. We're just so separated from like the boots on the ground people who are having to deal with things. And I think as a person of the world, when I was 13 or 14 and read Mistborn, I didn't care about that. This was just a fun epic. And now that I'm like 29 and I live in this world where we literally do not care about the people on the ground, I'm like, I care about that theme more now. So I like
a Joe Abercrombie book, it'll show you the little people and how this is affecting them, but there are no leaders that care about that. He's just making sure, like, by the way, here's the little guy, and this is not doing anything for them. They are suffering, by the way. So it's nice to read a character like Cooney who's like, so the little guy, all right, I think we should care. And you're like, oh, what a novel idea.
Like quickly becoming one of my favorite characters, and I like hope it stays that way, but we will see. Because I also like, it's truly an epic fantasy where I do not know who is safe or not, and it's kind of fun. So
Cooney is one of my favorite characters too, and also just that he was a commoner, right? That he kind of stumbled his way into this leadership position through like luck and knowing the right people and like skill.
He failed upwards.
Yeah.
He failed up so hard.
So the fact that he was
this is like chapter 3, Evie.
This is exactly what the story starts. It's on the back cover. Just the fact that he does it, I do think that it puts him more in tune with how the people, like, what's actually best for them. And the whole series in general is kind of about revolutions, and like so the second book really goes into changing the institutions that we have already had, and how just because we've always done something one way does it need to stay that way. And one of the big themes of the second book is like the role, including women more in the governance of the population, and how previously they had been really like put to the side. And the Grace of Kings does challenge that, but it doesn't really push it that far. But then in the Wall of Storms is where people start really asking those types of questions.
But you bring up a point that we should talk about, because I have been made aware, I did not think this personally, that people dislike the Grace of Kings because of the lack of representation of women. And I disagree.
I super
disagree.
I mean, I can see that with Grace of Kings. But the women in Wall of Storms, like literally, there are so many, and they are all so great, and like such badass women in the Wall of Storms. Because I think there are some women introduced, and there are some women carried over from the Grace of Kings, and I feel as though their personalities are much more developed in this second book, and that you get to see a lot more of their motivations and how they are driving the empire forwards.
The
I feel
series,
like that's going to continue in the rest of the series.
The series itself is one of the most feminist things that I have ever read, especially by a male author. In the last book, I was reading it, and then I realized that I hadn't read about a male character as a main perspective for like 350 pages.
You're saying it passes the Bechdel test?
In fact, it does, yeah. And I get, so there's two, I think, different types of criticisms that sound similar, but they aren't the same of the Grace of Kings. One is that there's not enough female characters, and one is that the book doesn't write the female characters well. The first one I totally get. There's like 3 major female characters into like the last chunk of the book, so that's totally valid. And if you want more female characters right away, I understand why that would be a turnoff for you. Although I would agree with Abby that like the second book has fantastic female characters all over the place. But the criticism that
binders of females in the second one.
criticism that the Grace of Kings writes women poorly, or that like Ken Liu was writing a sexist book, that's just like reading it incorrect, because there's literally a whole portion of the book where they like have a conversation about how the role of women has been, put like just they aren't being used properly, and that they have just been,
Kyle,
you
read it wrong.
Yeah,
I was going to say it's objectively untrue.
No,
I think what Kyle's trying to say is read it smarter.
Again. They did read it wrong. And you know what? Here's the thing. I actually didn't know that because I read the Grace of Kings a while ago, and I had forgotten the actual phrasing. And I just did a live show about the Wall of Storms, and Charmaine was in it, and she had an actual quote, and it was people talking about the role of women. And I was like, how can you read this quote and not know that this is not a sexist book? So it drives me crazy.
And also like the first complaint you talk about, like, I mean, I get that. I don't think that bothers me as much as other people, especially if it's obvious that the author didn't like forget to write women. Does that make sense? Like, there's a difference between like an author who's like, I just don't currently have the right position for these female characters because of the world I've created, and it is a patriarchy. Like, that's where we're at, and we are purposely. This is a big scope book. You are looking at points of power, and there are not that many points of power for women. And it sounds like we are, going to be working on that in future books. But there are some authors who just like, they don't mean to. There's no malice. They just forget to write women characters. And I just don't think that's the case here with Ken Liu. Like, I don't think that was the intention.
I mean, to that point, it's like
interesting to see, like, from reading Wall of Storms, how they view the characters from the Grace of Kings, and how not just the women in that book, but looking at women in history, and how women's how women are seen from a historical lens, both in the book but also in our own history. Like, if you look back on characters and you see that male character, and this is how they're remembered, and this is how their wife is remembered, and that sort of thing is looked at in the Wall of Storms, that you're seeing, this was one of the female characters in the Grace of Kings, and this is all that's left of her, this is all that we see of her memory. And actually some characters being really interested in looking at the history of these women and seeing that there is much more to them than what history says.
The re-examination of history is one of my favorite aspects of the series. He continues to do that kind of stuff throughout the whole series, and I really like it.
So who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
Hamilton, yeah, it's he's definitely inspired by Hamilton. I swear.
It's just a retelling of Hamilton.
Yeah,
confirmed. But I mean,
I think that goes back to just his intentionality. Like, the intent was not to actively, from what I'm hearing, obviously, because I haven't read Grace of Kings.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the intention was not to actively actively exclude female characters. But there is that. On the flip side, like, I think I imagine it probably makes Wall of Storms even more impactful by limiting that perspective.
By showing that this is actually a problem instead of having women all over the place and then have a second book that's like, women aren't used enough. You're like, pretty sure they are. I read a whole book that was all women all the time. What are you talking about?
To throw Evie and Leanna a bone here, this is like Mistborn, because Brandon Sanderson has just said, he has said publicly, I just kind of forgot to write female characters in Mistborn. And he's acknowledged that. He was like, yeah, I just...
The Mistborn's the one I like, Kyle, so...
Yeah, but like he literally did the whole, like, as a Sanderson fan, he did the whole, I wrote one very well put together female character and then like forgot that the world should also maybe have other women.
Well, to circle back to my fave,
not
that's
a patriarchy. Like Mistborn's world has a lot of issues in its feudalism, but like it's actually not quite a patriarchy.
To circle back to my favorite, that's exactly what Joe Abercrombie said about the First Law trilogy, that like, Artie's great, I guess, and like you have Pharaoh, but he's like, you just like start writing, about a warrior. Who's he talking to? A blacksmith who's also a dude. And who's the blacksmith talking to? A merchant who's also a dude. Who's like working for a king who's also a dude. And you just like end up with all dudes all the time, just kind of by default. And if you're not like trying not to, you just end up with everybody being a dude. And you're just like, whoopsie.
But so very sorry if you really liked Grace of Kings because there weren't any women in it, because when you read on, you will find women in the rest of the series.
I'm sure there's somebody that quit it. They were just like, there are too many women, for sure. There's one guy out there like that.
And like, I think so. There's definitely a lot of historical influence, but I heard from Tammy Tries to Read that he really doesn't want it to be completely so strictly tied to Chinese history. Like that's why it's in an archipelago and it's not on like a central land. But he also knew he couldn't make it super separate from Asian history because he's an Asian author and people were just going to do that anyways. So he was like trapped in that box. So I feel like some people would also be like, it's not historically accurate. It was like, but like he's inspired by history and he obviously is thinking about it.
You can't win for losing with that, because if you write it completely like history, people are like, well, this is literally just history. Make something up for yourself, sir. And if you do change it, like, well, that's not what happened in history. You've changed it. And you're like, what do you want? What do you want?
The Grace of Kings is very historically accurate. Like, I mean, it is.
Well, don't tell me because I don't know the end of Grace of Kings.
No, I'm not gonna say anything. But like, it is very. But then after that, so he kind of uses that historical basis, and then in the Wall of Storms, it's just a free for all. It's just entirely his own thing.
So, Kyle, which covers are more accurate, the UK covers or the US covers?
The US covers are accurate thematically. I think, especially after you read each book and then you look at the covers. Like they're always way more impactful. Like I love the cover of Wall of Storms and the cover of Speaking Bones, especially after reading the book. But in terms of the plot, the UK covers, like I feel like give you a lot of idea.
I can't speak to thematically, but I certainly feel like just having read Grace of Kings, which I suspected was true before I started them and was vindicated, that the tone of the books is more accurately portrayed by the dark colors of the US covers. They're like having the pastel, beautiful covers. Like that's not really the vibe of these books.
Also, the UK covers spoil some stuff that I feel like if you just have them or you see them in a store, it spoils some stuff that I feel like should be left for the reader to discover. But marketers, so.
I do like that the technology is kind of on some of the covers and some of the magical creatures, because a thing that works for me as a non-visual reader with Ken Liu is he doesn't actually describe things a lot, but sometimes he has mythical creatures that he's made up or are inspired by real world mythical creatures. And it's hard for me to like Google. Like there's like a thing that doesn't exist in the real world that is mentioned all the time to describe people's eyes. And I'm like, I don't know what this creature looks like. Like, but we're using it as a descriptive word. So I like that the UK covers have like some of those creatures. So like, I kind of know, but I was just curious because I'm starting to really like the series, so I might want to own them. but I don't know what covers to get. And I don't know if
Yes.
the UK ones all are available in hardback or if it's only paper.
Only paperback.
Yeah, with the UK, I'm stuck with having these first 2 in paperback, and then I'm going to have the 3rd and the 4th in hardback.
That's just madness. That's just madness. If you're going to release it, release them all in hardback. I don't understand.
Well, you can have them all in hardcover if you got them from the Broken Binding and it's a special stenciled signed
Those are
edition.
nice.
I don't need that fancy. I
Send
just
those
want
to
like a
me
step
and then buy
above
them all in
paperback.
I'm just saying, it is technically possible to have them all in hardcover. It's just, you know.
Meanwhile, can I get a hardback Jemison? Never. It'll never happen.
Well, Curious King is doing special editions after they finish First Law of.
I know. I'm looking into it. I'm nervous. I won't get them, but I'm following the Instagram. I'm doing it.
Thing. So again, technically possible. This is going to be an option.
But it shouldn't be this hard. Like, I don't want it to be like these super expensive special editions. I just want the $30 hardback available. Like, I just want the standard $30 hardback, which is still overpriced, but accessible.
I mean, even the US covers, because it was released a while ago, I had to get because I wanted them all in hardcover for the US, and I had to get them secondhand because they're not in print.
Well, and then the paperbacks have the stupid setback or whatever. Because I wouldn't mind the paperbacks if it didn't have the stupid darn setback.
Yeah, so I was able to find like on between eBay and like the used part of Amazon, and like I found but then so this is what I didn't know, that originally in the UK they did have these covers because the cover these are both US editions for 1 and 3, but I have UK edition in hardcover that's black for the Wall of Storms, and it's almost the same as these, but it's a different imprint and it's a little chunkier and it doesn't quite line up. And I was like, I didn't know they had black covers in the US. It didn't occur to me that was a possibility when I ordered black covers.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the UK readers, especially if you've been reading it for a long time, are a bit annoyed because they've got the black covers for books 1 and 2, and then you can't get that for 3 and 4. So they're now going
Come to the US.
They're buying the
But now
US.
the heights won't be the same. It's just, do they even think of us book collectors when they make these decisions?
They do not. I mean, okay, so you can have a matching set in paperback.
I don't know. I probably will
Yeah,
just keep getting them from the library.
You'd have to wait until all of these were released in paperback to get your matching set. And
Okay, how floppy is that? Show me the flop of the UK.
oh, they're not.
Oh God, no.
They doesn't like flop. They take an
Well,
anti-flop stance.
Winnowing Flame trilogy actually is like a pretty good book, but I noticed that when you get past like the 600 page mark with like a UK paperback, it's like you're over it.
Yeah, like this was really hard not to.
Yeah, like the Winnowing Flame's an okay flop. It's not amazing or bad, but you won't break the spine if you actually open it.
It was very hard not to break the spine, and I did sort of break it a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I want the UK ones to just look pretty, and I want the US ones to read. Also, I mean, my last 2 are signed by Ken, so like I'm not gonna like those. I'm keeping those.
We
no matter
get it, Kyle. You're BFFs.
Yeah, we're best friends. I'm just saying that I
So
have.
when you talk to him though, you need to ask him about his next project and then tell me what it is.
I will.
I just need to know what sci-fi he's doing next because I know that he
Presumably
has,
be able to see his answer because it will be an interview.
maybe.
Well, that
No,
was her low key saying that she's not gonna watch.
I don't watch interviews very often. I'm not gonna
And
lie.
that's a spoilery one, and we haven't finished.
For sure.
Yeah, you said it's
I'm
spoiler for the
just
whole
gonna figure it out.
series.
But yeah, no,
Yeah,
my
I'm definitely gonna ask him what he's doing
veiled
next.
throne is signed. It's just
I have a feeling it's gonna be sci-fi.
I know he doesn't have big epic fantasy plans for the future, but I mean, I'm down for a sci-fi. I want to know if it's space opera. I want to know if it's on Earth. I want to know if they're aliens. He hasn't done aliens a lot.
He hasn't done aliens much.
He has like one story with aliens.
What are you talking about? All the bookmaking habits of all of the aliens. So many aliens.
I meant with like alien culture characters interacting. There's like one story, and it's obviously based off like an Octavia Butler story. Now that I've read Dawn, I see it, guys.
Oh, you've read Dawn now? Yeah, it's very similar.
It's very similar.
Kyle, here's my question that I want you to ask him. Is he going to do any in-person stuff in Boston?
Oh, that's true, because he's like so loves Boston. The amount of times Cambridge is brought up is like astronomical.
Well, I think he lives in Boston. He lives like right outside of Boston.
Yeah,
he lives in, like,
ask him if he's gonna come to the Brookline Booksmith. That's my bookstore.
All right, I'll be like, listen, you got to go meet these people.
And is he ever going to come to the UK?
I feel like I have a better shot of getting my paper Menagerie copy signed than you.
Yeah.
Hey, my veiled throne is signed.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's because the UK has so many signed editions everywhere. Like I follow like Library of a Viking, just going shopping all the time and on his Instagram stories, and there's always like a million things signed. I'm like, why do you guys have all these signed editions everywhere?
I went to this discount book fair yesterday, and they had signed Joe Abercrombie, and
See, there it's becoming, it's
never
devaluing the currency, so to speak, because there's so many. It's no longer impressive to have a signed copy.
Guys, I could have met Rebecca Roanhorse and Ken Liu at my bookstore if there wasn't a pandemic. I really hate everything. I just looked, and the last time Ken Liu did like a talk for Brookline Booksmith was with Rebecca Roanhorse.
RF Kwong did a talk at my university, but it was virtual, and you had to be in the class. And that was because of the pandemic. If it wasn't a pandemic, she would have like came personally, and then I could have met her or like gone to the talk. But it's a shame.
Ken Liu and RF Kwong also had a talk together at my bookstore.
Damn.
Well, so the Brookline Booksmith is like the bookstore in Boston, like the indie bookstore that gets most of the author events. The Harvard one sometimes does, but the Harvard SFF section is trash.
The Los Angeles, the like one of the like more centralized, like in LA, Barnes and Nobles had a ton of author events that I used to go to all the time when I did not live like in downtown LA. And then now I live in downtown LA, and there's, you know, pandemic and no author signings, etc. So I'm like, I live a stone's throw from there now, and nothing. I had to drive like, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes before, but now it would be close by. Same with the theater where Pierce Brown has had his events. I'm hoping that when book 6 comes out, he'll do it again, because I actually live really close to that now. It would be really convenient.
I'm now just looking through all the events. They are starting to do more in-person events, but it's obviously like author dependent. Like some authors aren't comfortable with it, which I respect. I respect it. I just want to meet people before I'm back in Ohio where no one goes.
I just resent that they stopped having them when I live close.
It's just because you lived close, obviously.
It is. I'm glad you recognize this.
Evie, I feel like we didn't get a lot of your thoughts on some of your favorite short stories. Like,
It's fine.
You know, you guys were talking about the Grace of Kings, and I'm just trying to plug my ears so I don't have any.
Here's the thing about the Grace of Kings: it's not so plot driven that you can be spoiled in that way.
And you
you
so much about Cow Stomach
and be spoiled, Evie. So it's about.
I just don't want any expectations set.
Okay, you're gonna hate it. 2 stars. There you go.
I actually think it's a series where you do need some expectation, because otherwise you're going to be like, what's going on?
I already trust Ken Liu as an author, so I will just open myself up and go wherever he takes me story-wise.
When are you gonna? Do you have like it slotted in for when you're going to pick it up?
I thought about picking it up actually once I finished Live Ship, but then I realized I should probably just finish Realm of the Elderlings before I get into another epic fantasy.
No, you should.
Both
you
at
should
the
read both
same
of them.
I can't.
I was reading both at the same time.
I don't know how people can.
It's not a good idea. Do not do it.
I cannot juggle like series.
Yeah, but
like I just.
I'm reading 22
That's
series
literally-
right now.
Remember the
Well, I
other
just mean
thing
like they're both
going
very
to, like,
long books. You shouldn't just read them both at the same time. I haven't finished a book in like weeks.
But then when you finish them all, there was one day I finished 5 books in one day. That was like a glorious day. When I was like,
I'm guessing you did not start them all that day.
no. But
Okay.
that's the thing. You don't finish books for a while, but then they all get to the same point where you can finish several of them in one day, and you just feel super accomplished.
That is true. I just don't think that's happening, but that's mostly on my mental health than anything else. Like I really wanted to finish Grace of Kings before today, and like it's not a book to be rushed. If I rush it, I will not have fun. So I read it until I don't want to read it anymore, and then I move on.
I mean, I really don't like binging series back to back. Like it doesn't matter if I like it. It will ruin it if I do that. But if I can do it like one a month if I'm slotting in other things in between. So actually doing multiple series at once and binging them, but like flipping back and forth between them is actually good, because like I'm not burning out on either one because I get to switch gears.
Yeah.
What did you think of the audiobook for Grace of Kings, Leanna?
I
It's,
don't like the audiobook, but
it
I don't like
exists.
Michael Kramer. So
I don't mind Michael Kramer for like Wheel of Time and Mistborn.
Can someone please explain to me why Michael Kramer thought it was appropriate to do a Southern American accent for one of the
I don't
characters?
know. I did not appreciate him for Grace of Kings at all.
why is he the audiobook narrator for all of it?
Yeah, and it makes me sad because I really want to re-listen. Like I want to reread The Wall of Storms with context from the whole series, but I don't want to read a 1,000-page reread right now. So I'd like to do it on audio, and I'm just not going to. So I'll have to wait.
like Michael Kramer's not a bad narrator.
He
It's
is
just
a
like,
bad narrator.
Okay, well, fine. Leanna and I can be united on not liking Michael Kramer. That's fine.
I mean, obviously,
I was saying this yesterday when I was chatting with my page about Grace of Kings, and no one likes Michael Kramer. Actually, there's two that do.
I do know one person who's very excited that Michael Kramer is narrating Grace of Kings, and I'm so happy for them.
But like Michael Kramer sounds hungover, and he sounds bored, and he sounds like he doesn't like what he's reading, and that's infectious.
This pitch the entire time.
Very
also,
monotone.
outside the US, though, or at least here in the UK, you do not have any audiobooks. Your options are to read it physically or to read it on ebook, but you don't have the audiobooks. Obviously, the UK was like, oh no, we don't want Michael Kramer to be here, so you are going to read this book physically.
But so then you don't have an audiobook now, but what's going to happen is we're all going to be jealous of you down the line when you do get an audiobook and it's a great narrator.
I mean, more likely than not, they'll just like rechange the licensing so they can distribute it in the UK. I don't think I believe that they're going to spend more money to make a new audiobook.
They have different narrators in the UK for some series.
I guess maybe. I don't know. I don't think that's the norm, though. I think that's.
I mean, like, I keep hyping up the narrator, like the audiobooks for the Sun Eater series. Come to find out, everyone in the UK has got a different narrator, and I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about that person. I'm not recommending that. I'm recommending the one we have here, who is British. The narrator in America for Sun Eater is British, but he's not the narrator for the UK audiobooks. Go figure.
Yeah, but also, I was happy with my narration in my head.
Yeah, it kind of gives me my own narration in my head's fine. Because I did try when I was like being a little slumpy to use Michael Kramer to like immersion read with it. But like, so I usually use audiobooks when I can't physically read or when I need motivation to help me push through. And Michael Kramer does the opposite of that to me. He makes me lethargic and like distant. And like when I read Wheel of Time, which I don't love, so maybe I shouldn't be reading it, but I love Kate Redding. So whenever Kate Redding's talking, I'm like, I'm in it. I'm here. This is great. And I still like Kate Redding and everything else. So it's not Wheel of Time making me hate Michael Kramer.
Michael Kramer sounds like he's, again, hungover, but like he has 12 kids and he's going to have a family meeting and it's a deep sigh. And he's like, okay, today we're going to talk about how we all need to actually shape up and not behave in this way.
There are just so many amazing audiobook narrators, and I just don't know why he's the one. I mean, I know why, because he narrates the popular series that everyone loves, so like people have this nostalgic like Stockholm Syndrome attachment, but like...
Also, he just gets names wrong and is inconsistent, which is... I really don't like when people are inconsistent with names, because... then people get confused. There's a character.
He is better than Roy for A Song of Ice and Fire, so I'll give him that.
That's the gold standard of being bad. But there's a character named Jin in The Race of Kings, and then later on he says Gin, and then people were asking me, how do you say your name? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not the expert. Thank you for asking. But second,
can you go ask your friend Ken Liu?
I will ask my friend Ken. I'm gonna be like, all right, let's get these pronunciations down, Mr. Ken.
There's even a pronunciation guide at the beginning.
Mr. Ken, not Mr. Liu, because you're BFFs, and it's still first name, even if it's Mr.
Yeah.
Oh, also, like with Wheel of Time, Kate Redding and him are married, and they both audio rate. One of them decides that Elaine's British, and the other one decides she's not. I'm like, why don't we discuss this? Why?
Because the family meetings are held by Michael Kramer and no one can pay attention to what he's saying because he's growling his way through it.
Like, I'm just like, why don't we discuss these? I think that's my least favorite thing with narrators in general is like when they don't ask basic things like, what's the pronunciation of the main character's name?
But yeah, if it is a book that has multiple narrators and that those narrators, they're not like completely disparate parts of the book where they are going to be talking about the same characters and they are going to do dialogue for the same characters and they have not agreed how that's going to sound or how they are going to pronounce it. Like, it could be right or wrong, depending, like, it doesn't matter what the author says, as long as you both agree that this is how you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. Like, can you imagine if Stephen Pacey was not the only narrator for First Line? He's doing French Pharaoh, and then some other narrator pops in with German Pharaoh, and then yet somebody else has like a South American Pharaoh, and you're like...
To shift gears a little bit, because, whatever. There are a couple of adaptations, one that I've seen, one that I told Angela about, that I think are of Ken Liu's stories. So there's Good Hunting on Netflix. It's one of the episodes of Love.
The robot series, the animated.
Fair warning, there are animated body parts that I didn't know that I never needed to see.
I mean, they were in the story.
I mean, they were,
but I didn't need to see it animated. So
Faithful
still a good
adaptations.
Yeah, it's a good adaptation. And then there is a a short film that I have saved on YouTube. It's Memories of My Mother from The Hidden Girl. So
I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out.
Which is interesting just because that's the shortest story in The Hidden Girl.
Kyle,
Like that's the one that's like a couple pages.
I think
Okay, if it's not the shortest, it's 6 pages or 8 pages. It's a very short story.
So to go back to Kyle's question about favorite stories, so other than Good Hunting and other very obvious ones like Gray Rabbit, Crimson Mare, and Coal Leopard in The Hidden Girl, the shortest story, Cutting, like I just loved the project of it and how he executed it, and just all the layers in literally technically 3 pages, but the last 2 pages have maybe a dozen words on them total. So
I was trying to look up the Hidden Girl's table of contents to remember my favorite story, and all I see right now is an NPR clickbait article of The Hidden Girl is smart, but not entirely human, which is a little on the nose.
In The Hidden Girl, my favorite is The Hidden Girl and Gray Rabbit, Crimson Mare.
I don't know what my favorite one is in there. I do think it's definitely a short story collection that is better. It's like, what is the phrase? The whole is better than the sum of its parts or whatever.
Yeah,
I think that's that collection for me.
Sequel and spiritual sequels all over the place in The Hidden Girl.
And there's a lot of interconnections, and like it does my favorite thing in a short story collection of like, I want to address this theme, and the way I'm doing it as an author, as a thinker, is we're doing this many angles. We're coming at it from many. So you could be exhausted because I'm like, I'm done with this theme. So as a reader, that could be a negative. But I typically like that. So, but I think honestly, it is the one you haven't read that sticks with me. I don't know if that means it's my favorite, but Byzantine Empathy, like it's that one is in my brain a lot because it's a theme I think about a lot. Like, what does it take people to engage with these larger than life problems that are hard to engage with, because once we're out of our own circles, it's really hard as a human to do that. Like Leanna was saying, like it's difficult to sustain that type of care.
I like that you're linking my name with a lack of empathy.
No, I just meant that at the beginning you were talking about how like people care about like the little things. You have lots of empathy.
I think other than the obvious ones, I think one of my other favorites, I should backtrack. Me having a favorite Ken Liu story is like just saying all of these are favorites. Like there is nothing, they're just all so good. But
which, like, briefly, like it is rare to find a short story collection where there is not a weak story, right, where like the whole thing is great.
Yeah, exactly. But A Brief History of the Trans-Pacific Tunnel in the Menagerie.
That one's good.
Yeah, that just, I mean, it was very emotionally evocative, but it's again one of those perfect example of just the layers there, because it's alternate history and just so
I think you're really gonna like Grace of Kings, because the stories you keep mentioning from Paper Menagerie are a lot more similar to Grace of Kings than my favorite stories.
And even when you were reading The Hidden Girl, the stories that you really gravitated towards were the fantasy ones, and he really like it. Just they're very similar.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the table of contents, and man, so many of these stories I liked so much. One that I think I like because of who I am as a sci-fi reader, Maxwell's Demon. I'm a sucker for an author who approaches entropy ever. And that's another one that has historical context and really great sci-fi. The Dispatches from the Cradle, The Hermit, 48 Hours in the Sea of Massachusetts. I rarely see far future climate sci-fi that doesn't depress me and also really intrigues me in terms of, this is where we could be, and like the argument of maybe we don't return to what was after we made the mistake and the apocalypse has happened. We have made it this far. I thought that was fascinating. So like his sci-fi ones are and Thoughts and Prayers is so on the nose, but also like,
yeah,
especially in the last couple of weeks.
Thoughts and Prayers is probably the one from that collection I think about the most. I think about that one a lot. The ending of that one like really impacted me. Like I thought about that quite a bit.
And Thoughts and Prayers is exactly what you think it's about. Like it's completely thematically on the nose. If you do not want a thematically strong agenda story, probably should just skip that one. Although, like Ka says, it doesn't go exactly the way you expect.
Yeah. For the two stories, like I liked the Hidden Girl and other stories significantly less than the Paper Menagerie, because the Paper Menagerie evokes more emotion instead of ideas, and that's just kind of more of how I like to read. But there are no bad Ken Liu short stories. Like, I would say if I was to rank all of the stories that he's written, the worst one would still be like really good. So that just speaks to
Yeah, I gave more 3.5 or 3-star short story ratings in The Hidden Girl, but like I didn't hate them. They were just more like they were fine. They happened.
I like the Paper Menagerie more retrospectively, because I thought my other favorite short story collection was Skeleton Crew by Stephen King. I'm like, I love every story in this collection. And then I just reread it and I'm like, oh, I really liked 3 stories a lot. And my 15 years of memory have just inflated the rest of them. And so now I'm just like, wow, I actually do like all of the stories in the Paper Menagerie. So,
I mean, like, my favorite author is Neil Gaiman, and he does write a lot of short fiction, and I have read a lot of short stories from him. And I do think in general, like, he will have a short story collection that, like, again, I think it's a pretty high bar to have a short story collection where they're all hits. Like, it was not an expectation that I have. Even reading Neil Gaiman, I'm like, I'm sure that most of these will be great, but I'm sure they will not all be, and they aren't. Like, short story collections, I don't think it's possible for me to rate any of them 5 stars, because some of the stories are 5 or 6 stars, but some are not. And so reading Paper Menagerie, picking it up, I was like, okay, you beat Gaiman. Gaiman's my favorite author, and I do not expect, and I'm not disappointed by the fact that his short story collections are not all hits. But you, sir, Paper Menagerie, all hits. Well done.
No, I think
Yeah, that's
the
what we
Hidden
agree
Girl
with,
has
Ben.
more of what I like from the sci-fi technological side of Ken Liu that you don't like as much. So I truly think that you will like but not love the Hidden Girl. That's where I think it'll end up for you.
yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and Kyle, correct me if I'm misquoting you, but so when I was reading The Hidden Girl, I was voxering Kyle, like, I finished this story, these are my thoughts. And it's one of the things that we talked about is like how Ken Liu takes a stance in these stories, in the Hidden Girl collection specifically. Like, normally with like thought experiments, you would think that they would show like either be neutral or show both sides. But Ken Liu seems to, and Angela, you can either attest to this or challenge it or not. But he with it being such a personal collection, more so than the Paper Menagerie, he is firmly trying to argue the thematic elements that he's exploring in each story, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So
I guess I think maybe I don't believe that authors don't always do that. I don't know. I think it is not the exception to be like this. I think all authors
No, I know.
have a
Yeah.
thematic agenda, and some are more subtle about it. But even Ted Chiang, he has like a story where he's like pretending to show both sides, but it's like obvious which side that like he is pro. Like,
right.
so I didn't even clock that. I didn't even notice that, because I'm just like, yeah, you're telling me this. So yeah.
I think I get what Evie's saying though, because like, yeah, you it's impossible, as far as I'm aware, to like write a story and not have your own views kind of seep into it from your own life experience. But Ken is not really interested in exploring the other facets of what the idea that he's talking about. He's very firmly like, you can tell what his thoughts are in this whatever story, like whatever side he's saying. It's hard to discuss overall because they're like different ideas and stuff, but I get what Evie's trying to say for sure.
Yeah. But they're also usually not like extreme. Like, I guess also sometimes it's not even, I guess I didn't even take it like, so the Massachusetts one, the 48 Hours in the Sea of Massachusetts, the thematic approach to it was not the typical stance that I think thematically people take with that story. Like, especially in our day and age of climate sci-fi, a lot of it is prevention or how do we reverse it. Like, that is a lot of what's happening in sci-fi right now in climate sci-fi. And his approach was, it's happened. What if we adapt and we don't try to change it? And I mean, it was obvious that that was the message I was supposed to take away from the main character of that story, the person who was very pro that. But like, it was also different. Like, it's different in the genre of sci-fi. That's not the normal thematic message around that really overdone theme at the moment. Like, climate sci-fi is everywhere right now.
Can you tell people are stressed?
I have read so much climate sci-fi this year. How High We Go in the Dark. I haven't read Sea of Tranquility. I'm not going to read Sea of Tranquility. I love myself too much.
I didn't find Sea of Tranquility that dark, but I guess it
I
depends.
don't think it's that dark. It's just near future, pandemic, climate, sci-fi, and I think she's great. If you really want a quick literary sci-fi, I just don't like those usually that often, or I don't know. I'm very picky about my literary sci-fi.
Yeah, I didn't like Station 11 that much, but I did really like Sea of Tranquility. But yeah, maybe just give it a year or two.
Yeah, I think it would suffer, and I think if I choose to read that author, I need to start earlier in her back catalog.
Abby, did you have some thoughts? I feel like we interrupted you the last couple times. You tried to talk. Did you want to say anything about the short stories?
No, it was just to say that me and Leanna actually agree on Gaiman as well.
It's a good thing to agree with me about.
I don't think I quite like Gaiman as much as Leanna, but I have had positive feelings about every book I have read.
Yes.
I like the one that said Stardust.
I hate the book Stardust with every fiber of my being. It's
I
not
did not
good.
like it.
I don't hate it with every fiber of my being, but I was like,
The film is.
I didn't like it. I barely remember it now. It's been like a year.
I
think even Neil Gaiman thinks the film is better.
Yeah.
I think my issue with
it's got Robert De Niro, so.
Robert De Niro is great. I loved that movie so much, and I'm like, well, books are always better. You get to spend more time with the characters. It's going to be so great. And I picked it up, and I was like, what is this?
The thing that people always compare Stardust the film to is Princess Bride the film, and Princess Bride is another one that I like the movie better than the book.
I wish
We
I liked
can argue
Princess
about
Bride the
that.
film as much as Stardust.
So
Evie has a take.
A lot of people like that book. A lot of people like Stardust, but I like both the movie Princess Bride and the movie Stardust better than their respective books.
Yeah, no, so this is obviously going totally off topic, but for the Princess Bride, I think that William Goldman wrote the novel. It's very like it.
So far, we agree.
Yeah. No, sorry, I'm just trying to structure my thoughts. So it works for the format that it's in, and that William Goldman was able to adapt his own source material to the screenplay and make it work for the format that it's in. Change the things that he needed to and still make it feel like the book. Like you get the same humor, but in, I don't know, it's like it works for either format. Like,
So
you agree that the film is great.
The film is great, but I wouldn't say that it's better than the book. I think they're both successful in what they are doing in either format. So,
but you can spend less time consuming the story with the movie, and I do think time's a premium in my life. So
I feel like this is more broad and not just to do with these specifics. So these are good examples of when this happens. There's oftentimes that I'll want to see adaptations of, or that I'll be reading something because I know there's an adaptation and I want to see it. And therefore, I'm reading the book first, and I will dislike the book, but be hopeful for the adaptation because there will be I'll have a feeling that the characters are not well fleshed out, that they do not feel three-dimensional, etc. And that I know that a living, breathing actor, just by virtue of being a living, breathing actor on the author is what they don't tell you, you cannot extrapolate. But an actor in the scene is acting and has put backstory to their character. So having the actor fleshes out the character and brings emotion and brings nuance, if they're a good actor, I suppose, that it might be missing from the book and might make an adaptation better. And so for a large part of Princess Bride, that is why I like the movie better, because I feel like there's a lot of heart and emotion and there's just I care more about the characters when those actors are embodying those roles and bringing their emotion to those roles that I just don't get from the book. And I feel that way about a lot of adaptations.
But you get more of Fezzik's backstory in the book.
Backstory is not the same as feeling emotions about a character.
I'm also usually more emotional with things that have music, and that's a me thing. Music evokes more emotion from me than words.
Sarah McLachlan and the Dogs.
Yeah. So when you have the opportunity of matching music with a scene, that can be really magical if you choose it correctly. And so I think, I don't know, typically I like books more than the movie, but sometimes when you can have the visuals and the music and the, sometimes you can have a really special thing.
I will just say that my husband and I just finished watching episode 4 of season 4 of Stranger Things, and music does
Yeah.
does exactly what you're talking about, Angela.
Yeah,
with,
I just think that sometimes you can do some really magical stuff, and it doesn't necessarily, like what Leanna was saying. Oh no, what you were saying, like they're different things and they accomplish different things. I don't know, but anyways, I guess we should talk about Ken Liu, maybe.
To bridge the gap, specifically Abby, but also Leanna and Angela. Would you guys like to see like a Dandelion Dynasty adaptation?
I was about to say, like, maybe
So
we can
far?
talk about a
Or
Dandelion
do you
Dynasty
think that
adaptation.
it would not work based on what you've read so far?
I
I mean, I think it
feel
would
like,
work because it's low magic. Go ahead, Abby.
I feel like the first book might work. I want a TV show and not a film. You could not fit.
Which is really like nowadays that we have prestige television. I feel like every fantasy, with very few exceptions, TV show.
Yeah, this would not work as a film because there's too much going on. So I feel like it could work, especially the first book, as a TV show. And probably like it would be a slow build TV show that I probably wouldn't get like into it in the beginning. I feel as though because it would be quite slow. Maybe.
There's a lot of rebelling happening in the first. You could flesh out some stuff in the first book to really make it impactful.
Well, so when I was reading
the second book, though, I feel would be really tricky. Like they'd have to have a bit more of a budget.
I specifically want.
If they didn't have the budget, then it could look bad.
So
maybe
when
the first half could be quite good, but the second half, I don't know. Like I just feel like it could go.
So I think my opinion will help Abby's, because when I was reading it, I kept thinking of Avatar: The Last Airbender because a lot of the scenery and a lot of the technology is in both, and I'm like, I would.
Angela thinks this is a ripoff of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I just want that quote on the record.
No, but I'm also just nowadays, especially with how many fantasy adaptations we're getting and how many times people are just so freaking picky about special effects, unless it is truly all low magic. I'm like, animate it, and then animate it for as many episodes as you want. Like, I don't know. I think it could be really fun, but also if they really want to make the realistic, gritty approach, because it's like gory, so like it would have to be a Song of Ice and Fire budget, but it is not popular enough to be getting a Song of Ice and Fire budget.
Yes.
I don't like would the seriousness of the politics come across in animation though.
I think that first of all, anime has been doing serious stuff forever, and people take it seriously all the time in some of them. It's just that we have this idea in Western culture that animation is for children.
Attack on Titan is traumatizing.
Oh yeah, Attack on Titan, there is nothing lighthearted about that. And that's another one I was thinking of. It's like, I do think this could be done really well with animation, in that it can't be Arcane level because that's also a big budget. So it can't be done like that. But I think it could be done at like a good standard, what we grew up watching on like Nickelodeon or Toon Disney level animation, which is still really fun for fantasy.
I'm making that comparison now. I'm picturing a Disneyfied, a Nickelodeonified Grace of Kings, and I'm like,
but I just meant more like that style of like computer animation and stuff, like not like what they do for kids now, which is like
Pixar's Grace of Kings.
Going back, they already did it with Good Hunting. And
I was going to say the animation
very adult
would actually work pretty well, I think. But that being said, the end of The Wall of Storms, I just really want to see in live action. It is incredibly cinematic, and I didn't think I wanted an adaptation until I read that part, and I was like, I want this visually. I need this visually.
I used to think that there were unadaptable fantasies, largely because of like the visual spectacle that is involved in a lot of fantasy. But nowadays, I pretty much think that every fantasy could be adapted if you have the budget and if you have the right creative team. Like, I don't think there's anything that's unadaptable. There's plenty of stuff that has a higher chance of going wrong because of the amount of like visual stuff. So like I always say, like Laini Taylor, while I would think like that could be fantastic to see on screen, that has a high probability of going horribly wrong because of how much like visual stuff there would have to be, and you'd have to do it right.
Which is why I was saying, let's do live ship traders. There's not too many things. I just want live ship.
The talking ships could look really stupid if you have the wrong team.
That's true, but it's not like too bad. Like I think with practical effects plus CGI, it would work out.
It could.
I heard Jake say that Rob just doesn't want adaptations, which is really, really upsetting.
I don't know. I mean, that could be true. Who knows? I just think that like it's the type of family drama that people would eat up in a bingeable TV setting. Like it's that level of thing.
Could be, yeah.
Hot take: Live Ship Traders is what Mask of Mirrors was trying to be.
I don't think so. They're not the same to me whatsoever. But that's you read 2 chapters of Mask of Mirrors.
I read 4 chapters of Mask of Mirrors.
Evie is really good at judging a book real fast and sticking to that judgment.
They're very different
Wanna try
books.
again?
Like, I don't compare them whatsoever. I never compare the two. Like,
No,
I would
it's
never
just
be like, Leanna likes Live Ship. She should read Mask of Mirrors. I actually was like, Leanna should not read Mask of Mirrors.
I didn't want to. It wasn't my choice.
Did you not like Mask of Mirrors, Leanna?
No.
I haven't
We
read
liked
it yet.
it for the opposite reasons. She didn't like it because of the heisty con artist stuff. And I was like, oh, I usually hate cons and stuff, but I actually kind of like that part of it. It was classic us.
But I mean, to be clear, it's not that I didn't like it because it has a heist. I thought the heist was done very badly.
I thought that the heist was background enough that I got to focus on other things.
When Leanna tells me these kinds of things, I never know how to feel because like 70% of the time I disagree with her, but there's that 30% that I'm like, you absolutely nailed it, and then we see eye to eye. So
But
I never
for-
know which way.
So
it goes.
really, you just need to start agreeing with me more. Slowly, you will come to see the light, and the Venn diagram will expand.
I do want to mention though, because I'm the only one that's read it. Ken Liu does have a Star Wars novel that is middle grade. It's called The Legends of Luke Skywalker. It is kind of the Canterbury Tales in space. Although now that I just read Hyperion, it's like, oh, he clearly was inspired by Hyperion.
I was like, I'm pretty sure Canterbury Tales in Space has been done, and it wasn't that.
Yeah, for sure. And it is really fun. It is definitely like aimed younger. And Evie mentioned buying it for her husband so that he could get into Ken Liu. And I don't know that I would recommend that for people, but I would recommend it if you've already read Ken Liu and you're at all interested in Star Wars. It's really fun because it's all these people sitting around telling stories that they've heard about Luke Skywalker. And so it's playing with the idea of myth and legend and collective memory. And it's such a thing that Ken Liu explores.
That
And
does
there's one
actually sound
time
really good.
There's one time where Luke Skywalker, who it's like somebody's memory of Luke Skywalker, says something that a character in Dandelion Dynasty actually says, and I'm like, oh, I caught it. Like, this is just such Ken just being like, I want to explore all of these themes, but through the lens of Star Wars and for teenagers or like 12-year-olds or something.
In fairness to him, I don't think he thought that there's a much crossover between the middle grade Star Wars and the Grace of Kings audience. There wouldn't be a lot of people reading both.
Well, the rating for that book is really, really bad. And I think it's because a lot of people just pick it up because it's Star Wars and they've never read Ken Liu. And then
Or
like,
alternatively, it's the other way around. They read Ken Liu and like, this is a kid's Star Wars book. And they're like,
no, I don't think so. I think Ken Liu fans will at least respect it, even if they don't love it, because it is doing the exact stuff that all other Ken Liu stuff is doing.
Intentionality. Dun, dun, dun. That's probably not even a word, but whatever.
it is a word.
Intentionality is a word.
Oh, yeah, it's not a bad rating.
Yeah, it's really bad. It would scare me off if I hadn't have read other things by him.
I mean,
But, like,
I never judge Goodreads. So Goodreads ratings do not matter to me when I pick up a book. So many of my favorite books are like a 3.3 on Goodreads. I'm like, whatever, people are wrong. I move on.
I would never pick up a 3.3 without if you said, like, if you were like, Kyle, this book has a 3.3, but I think you would like it, I would pick it up. But if I just
But here's the
saw
thing, I get burned the other way too. Like, people love Dark Matter, and Dark Matter's bad. Like,
Dark Matter's not bad, Angela. I will fight you. Recursion is bad.
Well,
they're
Carl,
both
as
not
we-
great.
Carl, as you know that we've done the Goodreads check. Well, you did the Goodreads check on
Yeah,
us.
so Abby and Patrick are my two highest Goodreads percentages. Like, Abby and I are like 90% similar on Goodreads. So
Well, that means you must be close to me because Abby and I are like, I think like 75.
I
I
don't think
didn't know that Kyle likes fantasy romance.
well, it's only books you've read, right? So it's like how similar your ratings are. But yeah, that's my secret favorite genre.
I knew it.
Well, I will
This
let you know
explains
that
so much.
you align with Leanne on some things and you align with Abby on other. Abby likes Mask of Mirrors like me. So just so you
I
know.
expect to like Mask of Mirrors. I own it twice. Like, I have the audiobook and the ebook.
People
so
really like the audiobook. I haven't listened to it, but people really like it. I don't know. I read it with my eyes because I like the characters. I have a really cozy time with it. It's cozy. I will
So,
hold on to cozy.
Ken Liu. We've
Oh,
been
yeah.
going for an hour and a half, so maybe we can close with some final thoughts on Ken Liu. I don't know what would be like a good ending question. If it's, I guess maybe
My
Kyle will
final
be the best
thought-
qualified to answer this, but in general, like if we are telling people who have not read Ken Liu, where's the best place to start with Ken Liu?
I would definitely say Paper Menagerie and Other Stories. If you're more into sci-fi, like if you've already read like Ted Chiang, or you're just more interested in sci-fi in general, then maybe The Hidden Girl might speak a little bit more to you. But I would definitely say start with the short stories unless you are really interested in like epic political fantasy, or you already have like the wherewithal to start with something that's like bigger in scope, because otherwise it's the Grace of Kings is slow and it's going to be a bit of a challenge for a lot of people.
Daunting.
But, yeah. But Paper Menagerie is fantastic, so that's what I recommend.
My final thoughts would be that if you liked The Grace of Kings, but you weren't like obsessed with it, that you sort of were like me and it was like a 3.5. Well, for me, it's 3.5. Like it was good. You could see potential, but it wasn't your favorite thing ever. Then don't be scared about picking up The Wall of Storms. I know it's really big, but it didn't feel like an 850-page book because it was so good. Like it definitely, there's a lot that goes on between the two. Like there's a lot of improvement, I'd say. You can really see. Maybe he took some like critiques from this one and like when he worked on this one. I don't know, but it's a definite step up, at least for me.
Yeah, The Wall of Storms is one of the best books I've ever read, for sure. It is worth at least trying. I actually just told somebody who gave The Grace of Kings 3 stars. I was like, just give Wall of Storms 20% and see how you feel, because it is very different.
Yeah, I would definitely.
I think something we haven't like brought up that'll be my last thought, because I don't think I disagree with what Kyle suggested for starting where you want to read. I mean, I guess if you are a political high epic fantasy reader who is okay with a different narrative framework for that, like if you're like someone who likes fragmentation, like if you've read Malazan, like it's not nearly as dense as that. But like he does a similar thing where you just like see characters for like split seconds and stuff like that. You can probably go into Grace of Kings and you'll be okay. But the way that it's very different from Malazan, and what I think we don't talk about, is his writing style is very accessible. Like the way he forms sentences, like, yes, there are things about Grace of Kings that are abnormal, but it's not the writing. Like, it's not like the vocabulary is over the top. It's not like you're not going to understand what's happening. You just not know why you're being told the scene you're being told, but the scene's going to make sense to you. Like, it's just more like the context of why am I in this moment? Where are we heading to? That's maybe the more overwhelming part.
Well, it's a lot. He does make a completely unfamiliar world, characters, political system, history quite accessible. Like he makes it digestible. He like breaks it down in a way that you're not like, this is too much, I don't understand what's happening. Like he gives it to you in chunks that you're you're building this in your mind.
Yeah, Grace of Kings, like it's very chunked, and like part of that is I think his style, but part of that's also like what Kyle said at the beginning of this whole chat of like, this is I think how classical myths were done for East Asian.
But it does also break down your building of this world in your mind. You're not like, here's this whole world, like here's all of it all at once, now memorize it. It's like, I'm giving you these pieces so that you can like build it in your brain like Legos, and so that by the time you're in the end, you've got it.
Yeah, so like the reason to pick it up, you shouldn't be scared because of writing. This is not like, because I think what I was scared about, and I wasn't scared once I read his short stories, but I'd been hearing about it because of the distant narrative, and my big distant narrative fantasy that I like am about is Lord of the Rings, because that's a very distant narrative.
I did compare Grace of Kings to Lord of the Rings.
But that writing style in Lord of the Rings is less modern. It's harder to read if you're not used to it. And this is not that. Like it is more distant. It does have that fragmentation and chunking, but the writing is very accessible. Maybe for some people too modern at times in the dialogue. That doesn't bother me usually. But
I compared it to Lord of the Rings mainly insofar as like character behavior and dialogue and character types more align with that mythic storytelling of like Lord of the Rings, where they don't really act like people, like in the way that like modern day fantasy novels, very close third person. These are like people behaving in peoply ways. They behave a little more like archetypal symbols the way they do in Lord of the Rings than you're maybe used to in a modern fantasy novel.
Yeah, but I just think the big difference, because I think you're right, all of that is true. It's just that like I'm a reader that's very intimidated by Tolkien prose. And I just think that shouldn't be a reason why you should be intimidated by Grace of Kings.
We saw this a fair amount in Leanna's patron read for it, where a lot of people were like hesitant to start it. And they were asking me, they were like, can you tell me what character, because I mentioned to somebody, I was like, oh, just follow these characters, don't worry about the rest. And then they were like, can you tell me what characters? I'm like, literally, like it's fine. Like you're psyching yourself out. Everything is good. And then once they started, they're like, oh, it reads pretty easy. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say my final thoughts, since, I mean, Kyle, you hit the nail on the head with Paper Menagerie and all that good stuff, is as wonderful as the stories were to read on their own, I think they really are elevated when discussed with people. So whether it's be after the fact or as you're reading it. So if you have like friends to bounce ideas off of as you're reading, I would definitely highly encourage
For your
that.
emotional well-being, you should pick a group of friends and read Paper Menagerie and read one story per week. And
Or
not
get a therapist and then do it there. So
Well, and like I think a lot of us have Discords, and like I still have my Paper Menagerie channel perpetually open. So like you can find booktubers and people to like gush about things with for sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on to chat about Ken Liu. I'm excited to read more Ken Liu. I think all of us are excited to read more Ken Liu. Kyle's excited to talk to Ken Liu.
Very.
You run out of things to read, so you got to talk to the author because you got nothing else.
He has become an auto-buy author for me at this point. I will, like, anything he releases in the future, I will be getting.
I mean, yeah, I've only read Paper Menagerie and the first Dandelion book, but I mean, I feel comfortable saying the same.
Also, finishing like an epic fantasy series in 7 years is not a bad turnaround time. That's like pretty good pace.
Yeah, especially as compared to some of the greats.
Yeah.
We're still waiting.
7 years for 4 big books. That's not bad.
We're still waiting on some of those. So
when I was talking to Ken with Bookborn, after we finished the chat, we like talked for a couple minutes afterwards. Listen, I'm telling a story. This is relevant, okay? And then I was like, so what are you going to be doing next? Like, I heard you say you don't want to do epic fantasy after. And he was like, well, you know, like I kind of feel bad that I've been working on this for so long because my agent has only ever sold this. And I've just been working on it for a decade. So like he doesn't get any sales from me. So I need to do some shorter stuff after. And I just thought that was a funny response that he's like, oh, he's only sold one thing from me. But also like the idea that he's taking too long when it's for fantasy, a very reasonable turnaround. It's like 4,000 pages total, almost like 3,700 or something.
Like fantasy, I think is very different from like other genre fiction where like authors are expected to do like 1 a year or 2 a year, like in, you know, thriller and romance and mystery and stuff.
It's quality over quantity, baby.
So long story short, just read the damn books, okay?
Yes, I think we can all co-sign on yes. Read Ken Liu. If you didn't pick up on our enthusiasm over the last hour and a half, read Ken Liu and go check out the interviews with Ken Liu that Kyle and Hillary did. If you would like to hear from the man himself.
Indeed.
Were you going to say something?
He's very smart. He's really smart, and Bookborn's really smart, and I'm just there being like, indeed. Yeah.
It's funny because Bookborn says that he's really smart and she doesn't know what to say to him. I said
his resume is like off the walls. Like I'm just like.
But I feel like it's a lot more intimidating to have a conversation with somebody really smart. To be interviewing them is easy peasy. You ask them, "Hi, introduce yourself," and an hour and a half later, interview's done because they just talked for an hour and a half over very smart things, and you're just
That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Elaborate.
He just would go for like 15 minutes about like how parents are the gods to their children. And, you know, he's just talking about like the concept of parenthood and how, you know, we make our own gods. And I was just like,
yeah. So it's an interviewer's dream. You don't have to like make an effort. You just give them the barest prompt and off they go.
Yeah,
All right. Again, thanks for joining us. And everybody let us know in the comments your thoughts on Ken Liu. Let us know what you're picking up. Ken Liu, we hope we have
do not spoil any books in the comments. That's mean.
It is mean. We managed to talk for an hour and a half without spoiling the books. And
I spoiled the cow stomachs.
That's true. You're allowed to talk about cow stomachs in the comments. You have license to do that.
Well, not the payoff of the cow stomachs, just that cows have stomachs.
Just the cows have stomachs. And that the having of stomachs is also discussed in these books. All right. Well, on that happy note, thanks everybody for joining.
Bye.